presentation back in December. So, but that's how that works. So, and that's another thing that we're going to be working on soon is getting that all finished up for the end of the year and having our emergency exercise. Other than that is it for today, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Is there any questions? Okay, thank you very much. We'll now move to the consent agenda, and there's only been one item pulled. That's 3.4.1C, number 2, water safety swimming lessons. And so we'll move forward to, oh, first of all, sorry, I have to read the motion to accept the prior report. So, moved by Councillor Smith and seconded by Deputy Mayor Fulci, resolved that the Community Service Section of Coordinated Committee received the September 2018 Fire Department report for information.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Deputy Mayor Fulci, in favor. Councillor Bray, in favor. Councillor Ego,
In favor.
Councillor Smith,
In favor.
Mayor Smith,
In favor?
Councillor Belanger.
In favor.
Vote is 6 carried. It's carried. 6 in favor, 0 opposed.
I'll now read the consent agenda motion, and that was moved by Mayor Smith and seconded by Deputy Mayor Fulci. Resolved that the Community Service Section of Coordinated Committee does hereby receive the September 13th, 2018 consent agenda items 3.4 through 3.4.3, and that the recommendations contained therein be adopted as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Having heard the question, we'll call for the vote. Deputy Mayor Fulci,
In favor.
Councillor Bray, in favor. Councillor Ego,
In favor.
Councillor Smith,
In favor.
Mayor Smith,
In favor?
and Chair Belanger.
In favor?
6 in favor, 0 opposed. Motion is carried.
Okay. So we'll now move to the one pulled item, which again was the water safety swimming lessons, and that was pulled by Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I think this is a great initiative, and I have absolutely no issues supporting it for this year. But I think to commit the next council to it, I don't believe we should be doing that. I think, you know, to make a recommendation that it be considered during budget time would be great, because I think it needs to be part of a bigger water safety thought process. And to just say we're going to commit this to this amount to this initiative without knowing maybe some other things that might need to be done. So again, I have no issue with it this year, but I think it's more appropriate that we don't commit the next council until they've had a chance to review what they may want to do with funds for water safety.
Any comments?
So, could we maybe amend that motion to take out the ongoing level or standard of service to be reviewed at budget time?
Certainly.
Okay, I would ask for that amendment then. Or
Okay, any further comments?
Thank you,
Councillor
Mr.
Smith?
Chair. Chris, through you to Chris, are this already in their programming for the schools? Have they already allowed time and allocated the time for it as yet?
The final scheduling has not been organized because the funding isn't there yet. But the idea was that there's a little bit of a under usage of these school hours in the afternoons this fall, and that's where the idea came from originally. So we would look to try and get this stuff started as early as late October and get these 4-week sessions set up for the different classes. So no, it is not scheduled, and this is somehow the rationale behind the second motion was that if we don't feel like putting it into this year's budget, we can recommend that we could start to consider it for fall of 2019. But spring is actually apparently booked solid with these school group time slots that work at a slow time in the day during school hours. So it would be great to move now and start to book and get the buses, etc. organized.
So just to be clear then, with their curriculum, they've budgeted this for looking ahead to January, they've already budgeted the time for these lessons. Is that what you're saying? Or are they doing it already?
No, the grade 8s do not have a swimming program currently out of our 3 elementary schools, but we do have support from all 3 principals that they would support this. I think schools are in favor of a 2-hour field trip. It's good for the teachers and the students, and they would fit it in, provided we can look after the busing and have the pool available.
Just supplementary, if I may. With the new council, we don't know when the budget's going to be approved, and we're already getting into, it'll be spring before, not spring, but hopefully January, February, March timeframe. So I don't know. I don't have a problem if it's $7,300. We have the money in the corporate initiative budget of going ahead. We can approve up to $5,000, I believe, and that. Anyway, I believe that that's worthwhile initiative and carry through.
Okay, just to give order, we're going to go to Councillor Bray, then to Mayor Smith, and then to Deputy Mayor Byfolchi. So
just a little clarity for Councillor Smith. The 7,300 would look after swimming lessons this fall, I think is the part that I would have concern with is setting it as an ongoing standard and then telling future councils to provide this every year. I think spending the money we have this year is fine, but committing it to a new level of standard is not something I'm comfortable with. And then my question through the chair to Chris would be the risk management approvals from the school boards. Have you had preliminary discussions? Is that an easy thing to get?
We have. I think, like every outing, the school board just requires that we sign off, and that there will be some details there of the times and dates, etc. And I think it's just underwritten by their insurance.
Thank you.
okay, Mayor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Chris. Chris, $7,268 or $7,300. Is this, as we look forward to the future years, has the Y set this price as a price each year, or are we looking to see this increase? Save and accept numbers of students attending, obviously.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, to Mayor Smith, I do think that this is only a 1-year standard, although we could look into negotiating that. Certainly the Y, as our partner, has set a price, and they have to pay their lifeguards, and they rent out the pool to the schools through our funding. But it could be to our advantage to have that discussion, and I suspect they would be in favor. They certainly are promoting these initiatives. It's a great way to introduce families to their facility, so maybe I can propose that, but no, I don't have that price set for future.
So if I may, Mr. Chair, I would suggest that maybe, I think it's a great program. I have no problem for $7,300 approving this for, 4 or 5 years into the future. I don't think it's a big dollar amount, and I think that the benefit to our children certainly outweighs the cost by far. But I think I'd like to see something done with staff and the Y to ensure that that cost isn't going to escalate a great amount over the next few years.
Deputy Mayor.
So that goes back to my point that I think the first part of this recommendation, I think we would all be willing to accept that for this year. But I think if we could just amend the motion to say, maybe we can get those numbers. Would we get a better rate if it was for so many years, and it comes forward at budget time for the next council to make that decision. We're still allowing it to go ahead this year, and then we can get the proper information that we require for the next council.
Thank you. I think Councillor Bray, you had your hand up again.
I'm good, thanks.
Okay, Councillor Eagle.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I was the one that went to Josh and Chris about bringing this forward. It concerned me because we live in a beach town, and I was under the opinion that everybody here should have the opportunity to learn how to swim. I know we talk about water safety all the time, but we're in a situation where our own children in our own town maybe can't afford or don't have the means to get swimming lessons. I thought maybe we could put a program together with the school to try and make this work. So far, I'm very pleased with the report that they brought forward. And as far as cost goes, I have no problem with the cost, because if it saves one life, that's worth every penny of it. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor?
Just for clarification, I think we all agree it's a wonderful program. It's more about the fact that we are committing the next council, and there is a bigger desire by some in the community to look at water safety in a bigger way, to look at, you know, do we spend money on education? Do we spend money on swimming lessons? Do we look at lifeguards? So all I'm saying is that I think it needs to come forward at budget time as part of a bigger outlook for the community for water safety. I don't think anybody's saying that this isn't a good cause and that we need to look after our children. All I'm asking is that we do the proper process and don't commit the next council until they have had a chance to review it properly. So I would ask that the amendment, maybe we could draft something.
Okay, and maybe I'll just make a comment, or is by point of order, do we need to, we haven't had a motion, so I'll make a comment. I just think that regardless of whatever safety programs that we enhance in the future, this would be a component of it. I think to put an onus of accountability on future councils is not a bad thing. They could certainly bring it forward and change it if they liked. But again, that would resonate through the community. So I think this is something that, as Councillor Eagle said, that we should commit to on an ongoing basis. And it isn't a large amount of money. And I think future councils will consider all the rest of safety enhancements around this over and above. So I'm certainly willing to support it, but I would suggest that if we can negotiate a time frame where we know that that cost is not increasing, if we were to commit for a longer period of time, that we would do that. Councillor Bray?
Then I think that's the purpose of the amendment. So I just wanted to repeat, nobody's against swim lessons for this year for the 2018-19 school program, but we don't have budget numbers for 19. We can all assume bus costs are going to go up. We can all assume lifeguard costs are going to go up. We don't have those numbers. So to put in a ongoing standard of service isn't fair without those numbers. If you want to defer this to the next meeting, we will then miss this window of opportunity for fall 2018. So I think we should look at this amendment seriously to try to get this moving for this year.
Okay, we're gonna, I'll take two more comments if there are two, and then we'll either move to the amendment or...
Okay, I'm just referring to that, I believe Councillor Bray in that second paragraph, it's only a financial commitment for the 2019 budget. It doesn't say for 2020, etc. So I think once we deserve to give the full school year the opportunity to participate, and we have our future lifeguards perhaps coming out.
Let's just confirm that.
Deputy Mayor?
I was going to say, it says right here, an ongoing standard of service. So that means moving forward, it's ongoing. So it's not, we're not just speaking about the 2019 year. We are talking ongoing service forever.
Well, I just read it.
Okay, we're going to stop it there. Do we have a motion for an amendment, or is that required? Or?
Have we read the question? Is the main motion on the floor?
I believe the amendment was discussed ahead, or should we read this? Okay. So we will move forward with the original motion, and this was moved by Councillor Smith and seconded by Mayor Smith. Resolved that the Community Service Section of Coordinated Committee recommends to Council that the town staff is directed to implement a water safety swimming program for grade 8 students from Birchview Dunes, St. Noel, and Worsley Elementary Schools, with the busing, instructor fees, and pool and facility rental expenses taken from the corporate initiative budget 01-110-5110-05934 at a maximum cost of $7,300. Further, that Community Service Section of Coordinated Committee recommends to Committee of the Whole as a budget committee to recognize the water safety swimming lessons for local grade 8 students as an ongoing standard of service, and continues a financial commitment with the 2019 budget as part of the recreation events and facilities operating budget.
So, so the amendment that I would ask for there is to just recommend to the budget committee to consider it as part of the ongoing. Then we're not tying their hands, we're just saying, please consider this, it's a great program.
Councillor Bray?
Thank you. So two things. I think we could easily eliminate the second paragraph of that. The first paragraph of the motion very clearly says, let's spend $7,300 and let's give them swimming lessons this fall. If we are considering the second paragraph, I would like clarity from Chris what his understanding of it is as an ongoing standard of service, because there seems to be some confusion on this side of the table.
Certainly, through you, Mr. Chair. This money would be budgeted back to the education component. I think someone spoke to that just earlier, of our water safety initiatives. We're currently at a standard of capital and operating, I believe it's $25,000, give or take, for this current budget year. So I think the suggestion in the second motion is to recommend, but consideration may well be a more appropriate manner. I mean, the entire budget will need to be approved at some point in 2019, but I think the idea is that if we can set up this program, it becomes a consistent standard, but that entire, let's say $25,000 water safety pot should be considered through a budget process every year. And we just sort of wanted to make the point that we thought that this could be an ongoing program because it is sort of a set group of kids we graduate each year from our elementary schools.
Councillor Eagle?
Thank you. Could I just have clarification about the budget for putting this in the budget for next year or the year after? That's still up to the people that are making up the budget, and when the budget comes forward, if they want to gas it, they can gas it, can they not? Like, why are we worried about the money being in the budget for future years? If it's not put in the budget, it's not going to go forward anyways. So that's what I don't understand.
Okay, Dina?
I'm just through you, Mr. Chair. I do believe the word recognize means that it is put into the budget. I would defer to Jocelyn if she was here, but I do work in past experience. The word recognize means that the decision is made to put it into the budget. Considering means that the new council will, or at budget time.
Thank you for that clarification.
I do believe that's what it means.
Thank you.
Mayor Smith?
So just to further clarify that, hate to belabor this, because it should be pretty simple, but recognize means it will be in the budget. But at the end of the day, any future council going through the budget deliberation can take anything that they wish out or add anything they wish to.
I believe that would be a reconsideration of a decision. As I say, I would defer to Jocelyn for the proper wording, and maybe she can help
Well, with that, maybe we can ask
Maybe we
that
can defer to
question.
Jocelyn.
We're
for
on
that
TV,
one.
everybody.
If you'd like to come to the table, Jocelyn, we'll just fill you in quickly. We are looking at the grade 8 swimming lesson program, and I believe everyone at the table is in favor of moving forward this year. We're now would like it at least to be a consideration or on the table for future years, and the word in question is that it would be recognized in future budgets, so which our clerk indicates that might mean that it's expected that it would be in the budget and passed, or to be considered, which would mean that it would be brought forward in the budget, but future councils would make that final decision.
And so through you, Mr. Chair, the word consider is the better word. We shouldn't put things in at this time that are committing ongoing budgets for the next council. We have had that conversation with our legal counsel with regards to that, and we shouldn't be making commitments now for next council's budgets. But considering that and saying that this council is recommending that this is a good program that could be considered in the budget, but I would use that word consider.
Okay. So just for a point of clarification, it would then be on the budget list of items to be approved if we use the word consider.
Yes, so we would bring it forward in our initial plans, in our first drafts, and then it would be presented and tabled at that time.
Thank you. Mayor Smith?
So I was just going to say, then I'd be more than happy to second the Deputy Mayor's motion to change that to consider, and I think we can move forward from there.
So I think it's just that one word.
I don't know
So
where it
think I-
goes.
Having heard the question with the amendment to change the word from recognize to consider, I'll call for the vote. Deputy Mayor Byfolchi?
In favor?
Councillor Bray?
In favor?
Councillor Rico?
In favor.
Councillor Smith?
In favor.
Mayor Smith?
In favor?
Chair Belange?
In favor.
Vote of 6 carried and 0 opposed. Motions is carried.
Thank you. That. We can, I don't think there's any further, so we can adjourn this section for, how long do we believe it'll take to change secretaries for this one?
9 minutes.
5 minutes, okay.
9. I said 9, just to
Oh,
round
9
us,
o'clock.
just to
Okay,
round us up to
10
9 o'clock.
Okay, we'll go till 10 o'clock. You have 7 minutes.
10 o'clock.
9 o'clock.
9
just-
o'clock.
Just 9.
Good idea,
10 o'clock, we
Joe.
get our breakfast.
order. This is the Public Works section of Coordinating Committee. We have one deputation, Mr. Brian Wickenheiser. Did I say that right?
Yes.
Okay. And Kevin, if you wanted to do a little introduction, that'd be great.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. As the committee is aware, every 2 years we undertake structural bridge inspections of all of our facilities, both vehicular, pedestrian, and a bridge by definition under the, I guess it's the Public Transportation and Highway Improvement Act, is defined as a span of greater than 3 meters. So it could be twin culverts, it could be one large culvert, or it could be, like I said, pedestrian bridges or your typical vehicular bridge. And Brian has been performing these bridges inspections on our behalf since at least 2012, maybe 14. 2010, so sometime.
Thank goodness Mike
quite
came
knowledgeable.
today.
And so we do have the results from the recent inspections, and I'd ask Brian just to come forward and just give a general overview of the condition, and you can answer any questions thereafter. So Brian is the senior structural engineer with the Ainley Group, and he's here to present his findings.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair, Council, committee members, and staff. I'm ready to be here to provide this presentation to you. Unlike in previous years, the previous presentations I've given only covered the vehicular bridges and culverts. This also will include pedestrian bridges, so it'll give you a bit of an idea of the state of your pedestrian bridges too. At the present time, the town of Wasaga Beach currently has 18 bridge and culvert structures with greater than 3 meters span within the town's road network. It's a 50-50 split. 9 of them are considered bridge structures and 9 are large span culvert structures. And the town also currently has 11 pedestrian bridges identified within town's trail networks. If those structures were to be replaced at the present time, the estimated value for replacement of the structures is $28.63 million for road structures and another $2 million for the pedestrian structures. But it's skewed because $19.5 million of that is actually associated with just the Schoonertown Bridge and Main Street Bridge, your large span bridges of the Wasaga River. This, as part of our assignment, we update and maintain a bridge location map. This past year, there was actually 2 additional structures that were identified and have been added to the map. Unfortunately, it's a little small for everybody to see, but I think the report was sent through, so if people want to print the map at a larger scale to look at it, they can do that. Okay, so within recent years, the town has done a significant amount of work over the past, I guess, 5 to 10 years on the bridge structures within the town of Wasaga Beach. As you can see there's a number of bridge structures. I think there's 6 bridge structures and 3 culvert structures that have all had work completed on them since 2005, with the majority actually being since 2013. Based on that addresses many of the needs of these structures. And a lot of them are minor rehabilitation works, but bridges like the Schoonertown Bridge were significant, obviously, rehabilitation and widening of that structure. Within the pedestrian bridges, there's 3 pedestrian bridges that have had some rehabilitation completed in recent years. The most recent one was the superstructure replacement of the Lamont Creek Bridge in behind Twin Creeks Golf Course. That was just completed last December. And also recently, the bridge at the Arches Garden pedestrian bridge has been removed by the town, so that's no longer an existing structure. One of the big, when we complete our inspections, we basically prepare a summary report for each structure, but out of that, what we use that to develop is the bridge needs forecast for the town. So I've included in the summary presentation here, the bridge needs forecast for all the structures here. Likewise, it's a little small here. The first one here covers the needs, or the ongoing forecast of needs for the vehicular bridge structures, the 9 structures listed on here. The next slide contains the 9 culvert structures, and then we have 2 slides here related to the pedestrian bridge structures. As you can see, just in quick glance here, there's obviously more work identified for the pedestrian bridge structures in the coming years than in the vehicular bridge structures. I'll get into some of the more specific numbers going forward here in the slides. So the roads needs structures summary here. Generally, based on the work that's been done in recent years, your road structures are generally in good shape, with the exception of the Main Street Bridge. The current maintenance needs for strictly maintenance work on them is for the next 1 to 2 years is roughly $61,000. The recommended capital works to these structures is a total of $5.9 million, of which though $5 million is for the Main Street Bridge. The other 3 structures listed on there have just minor modification works required or recommended for those structures in the next 1 to 5 years, I believe it is. Pedestrian bridge needs summary. The pedestrian bridges, unfortunately, are at the other end of the spectrum. They are generally in poor condition. With currently 4 of your 11 structures are currently closed. The maintenance needs on these structures amounts to $39,000 identified for the next 1 to 2 years. But the total recommended capital works for these structures is $1.3 million, which, as I mentioned earlier, they actually have a total replacement value of $2 million. So it's a very significant amount of work required, with many of these bridges actually requiring replacement or significant rehabilitation works on them. So to identify the individual bridges here, these are the vehicular bridges first here. The Cedar Grove Bridge basically has an estimated cost of work required of $18,500 with a timing of 6 to 10 years. And this is will be an ongoing need for this structure. Every probably 15 to 20 years it will require removing a scale from the girders just based on the type of steel, and they will scale over time, and that scale traps the moisture in there. So to ensure the longer life limit, it's required to remove the scale from these girders. The Freethy Road Bridge number 3 has an estimated cost of work of $45,000. It's strictly related to installing proper steel beam guide rail on the approach end of the bridge structures for roadside safety. There's some unsafe slopes there right now which the public needs to be protected against. The Main Street Bridge is the big one on here. It's got an estimated cost for rehabilitation of $5 million. The recommended timing is 1 to 2 years. Based on the findings of our inspection, we believe that you really should be trying to do that work within the next couple of years. We are seeing an increase in deterioration of the structure. While at the present time we did not see anything that gives us concern regarding safety, I expect in the next couple of years we will start to see the deterioration reach levels that may jeopardize the structural integrity of portions of that structure. As such, we would like to recommend that be, I guess, at least identified for that work to be completed in the next couple of years, if at all possible. The Floss Road 10 culvert is a large corrugated steel pipe structure. It's been identified for replacement in the 1 to 5 year time frame at an estimated cost of $875,000. In conjunction with replacement of that culvert, there's a large amount of scour and water course erosion at the outlet of that culvert that would need to be identified with that before it undermines the structure further. Moving into the pedestrian bridges here, the recommended work. The Christopher Avenue pedestrian bridge is currently closed. It has recommended rehabilitation, which would involve actually changing the alignment of that structure and replacing the substructure, so replacing the piles or the piers underneath that structure. The estimated cost is $60,000. The design for that work is complete. It can move forward, I guess, when council has the money to do that work. But we recommend that you're going to want to do that in the near future, as the bridge is currently closed. The Sumac Court pedestrian bridge. This bridge was replaced, it was rehabilitated, I think, about 8 or 9 years ago. Unfortunately, there's been some ongoing erosion of the water course, so there's been some scour of the slopes. So we have some recommended work related to repair and stabilizing the embankment adjacent to the structure so it doesn't undermine the abutment for that bridge. And the estimated cost for that is $32,000. The time we recommended 1 to 5 years. Basswood Drive pedestrian bridge is currently closed. The estimated cost related to that is $57,500. Now, the recommended work for that is actually not to replace that bridge. It actually is only crossing over a drainage swale. It would be much cheaper and probably more efficient to remove that bridge and actually modify, either install a small culvert or actually modify the trail to actually move down and through the drainage swale and just armor the trail through that portion. Club Court pedestrian bridge is likewise currently closed. This is actually it's a long span structure with a pier under the structure. The structure actually has failed, and that bridge is actually in a state of collapse, which was the reason for the closure of that bridge. It will require a complete replacement of that bridge, including stabilization of the adjacent water course banks. This embankment is very steep there, and there's been a lot of ongoing erosion and scour, causing instability of embankments adjacent to the bridge. Pridham Park pedestrian bridge, it's been identified for replacement in the 1 to 5 year time frame. It's a timber structure. While it generally is performing fairly well, it is severely undersized in terms of the load capacity is dictated by the Canadian Highway Bridge Design Code, and it should be identified for replacement in the near future. Goose Gardens pedestrian bridge, it just has some work here. Likewise, that bridge is actually undersized. It does not meet the design load requirements of the Canadian Highway Bridge Design Code. So we're recommending some rehabilitation work which would involve either replacing or supplementing or reinforcing the existing girders on that bridge to provide the required capacity. Because it seems to be performing well, and I don't think it's actually getting the load that would be dictated by Canadian Highway Bridge Design Code, we're not at this time recommending replacement of that bridge, but we do recommend that it be looked at in the future for reinforcing or supplementing that bridge. The Martin Drive pedestrian bridge, this is one of the bridges that was just recently, I guess, I identified and added to it. It's along McIntyre Creek Trail system. It's likewise in very poor condition. There's a number of bridges that were all installed at the same time, and they're of the same type of structure, and unfortunately they don't meet the bridge code, but they're also in a state of severe deterioration, and they actually are very close to collapse, a number of these bridges. So that bridge there is not as bad as some of the other ones, so while we've left it, we're recommending that it can be left open at this time. We're identifying it really needs to have work done in the next 1 to 2 years on it for replacement, or it will likely be recommended in the next inspection round as being required to be closed. The Orchard Drive pedestrian bridge is likewise closed. It's the other bridge that was identified this year. When we actually did the inspection, we discovered that it actually had partially collapsed. One of the abutments had failed on it, and the end of the structure had collapsed. So it was recommended for immediate closure, and it's identified in our bridge needs as requiring replacement for that bridge structure. And that's basically the summary of the structures at this point. Thank you for listening. Does anybody have any questions?
Okay, thank you. So just moving forward, Kevin, you'll obviously take these recommendations, and anything that is urgent would come through the budget process moving forward. I was happy to see that consideration for maybe removing bridges and looking at culverts and other options is being looked at, because I don't think people realize how much a bridge can cost a municipality when they put them in. So I'm happy to see that. Did you want to add anything, Kevin, before?
Yeah, certainly. Obviously, there are some needs within the pedestrian bridge assets. We did have a budget this year to advance the Pridham Park pedestrian bridge rehabilitation. We've held back on that because when the results from these priorities were received, we're looking to reallocate those funds into the more immediate needs. As Pridham Park, as Brian indicated, could span another 5 years without major rehabilitation. We did subsequently advance the design and contract specifications for the Christopher Avenue Bridge. We've secured that bearing on the south side of Treeland Creek in the interim, but that is something that we're looking to advance this fall, and we're confident we can address that immediate need. Some of the bridge structures, as Brian had indicated, primarily in behind McIntyre Creek area, they are old trailer flatbeds that have been there for many, many years, and they're deteriorated. There are 2, if not 3, platform bridges, we'll call, that really aren't entirely necessary. So a couple of the other larger items, there is not truly a need to even replace that bridge because of the proximity to a newer bridge at Sumac in terms of advancing the rehab and replacement of the Club Court Bridge. So we do have a strategy, and we'll certainly present that to committee and council. The other structure which is new on this, and I'd asked Ainley to advance the OSM inspection, is the one at Orchard. So there is a bridge structure that spans the end of Orchard Drive at the cul-de-sac at the cemetery over to across the golf course that comes out through the tennis courts. Interesting piece of property. The town owns all of the property around adjacent to that corridor, but there's a block of land that actually isn't owned by the town in which this bridge sits. So technically we don't own that bridge. However, I had requested Ainley to advance that as we look through some of the land title issues and whether that was mistakenly not transferred to the town, because we have seen that elsewhere in town. So that structure technically isn't owned by the town at this point, but we have all the recommendations have been implemented in terms of closure and securing those structures so pedestrians aren't using them. They've been signed. Some of the older bridges have been closed for at least 5 years along behind McIntyre,
right,
like
it's
Martin
actually
Drive and Club
6
Court,
years.
just from golfing, and you can see that they've welded frames across that structure to eliminate pedestrian traffic. But certainly there's a lot of needs here, and then we will bring a report forward identifying our strategy. But as Brian indicated, we do maintain that 10-year forecast as we have every 2 years, and that's introduced into our capital planning for structures. So there are some needs that have been acknowledged.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ego?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could you go back to the third slide? I think it was the one about where you said $1.3 million for maintenance and $2 million to replace.
Oh, the other way?
Fast.
That right there. No, just kidding. Can't read that.
Thanks a lot.
This is
What's the
second
next
page,
one, I
so
think?
That's the first page there. Which one were you looking for? The one that mentioned?
It mentioned you said $1.3 million to maintain and $2 million to replace.
Okay, so actually I think it's a combination there. So basically, early on we gave the replacement value of your structures. So in other words, if you were to try and replace all your existing structures in kind with similar size or types of structures, your pedestrian bridges have a value or an estimated value of $2 million to build what you have currently in with new structures. However, the value of recommended work for your pedestrian bridges right now is $1.3 million.
And how many bridges was that?
That is 11 structures.
So my question is, would you be more economical to replace them than to refurbish them?
That $1.3 million is actually primarily made up of replacement costs. So most of those bridges are identified for replacement. So that's why the number is so high, because most of them are beyond the point of economic rehabilitation and would require that. So as Kevin mentioned, a number of these ones are these old truck trailer flat beds. They have severe deterioration of them. They're basically disintegrating is what's happening. They cannot be rehabilitated the way they are, as well as the fact that they actually don't meet the Canadian High Bridge Design Code loading. So they need to be replaced with structures that would meet that.
Sorry, Brian, it was just confusing that I was seeing 1.3 million to maintain.
1.3 million actually
and
is...
then 2 million to replace. So I'm thinking along the lines, would you be better off just to replace them all than to refurbish them?
Sorry, to identify, to make it clear on the wording, so we have the term we use, we call it maintenance, which is just generally the stuff that's of the lower cost stuff, and then we have recommended work or recommended capital work. The 1.3 million is actually recommended capital work. It's not actually maintenance work, it's actually identified work that's required, and that would encompass either rehabilitation or replacement work typically. So within that $1.3 million, there is some rehabilitation identified for some structures and replacement for others. But the majority of them are actually identified for replacement along the McIntyre Creek Trail.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Kevin, did you want to add to that? Or?
Just,
okay.
I guess my comment is, as part of the planning process, we look at that very same, the cost benefit analysis of rehabilitating versus replacing, and then certainly evaluate that as part of the program.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Boulanger?
Yes, my question, thank you, Chair, is about the Main Street Bridge. Now, my understanding is we've been denied a grant request 2 consecutive years, and we're recommending that the work needs to be done in 1 or 2 years. So at what point in time do we have to go out and do a debenture or do whatever we have to do to replace that? Because, I mean, there's generally a time frame required to get everything in order to commence work. And so what are your thoughts on that, Kevin?
Sure, through you, Madam Chair. So we've acknowledged the Main Street Bridge requires rehabilitation for many years, and in fact, we started to place monies into reserves. I want to say as far back as 7 or 8 years ago, acknowledging that within this time frame it's due for major rehabilitation. There's 2 components to the OCIF, and Jocelyn is not here. However, there's the top-up component, and then there's the municipal allocation. Formula based. So we've been allocating that formula base towards the Main Street Bridge for several years. So we do have a very we do have a reserve to advance this, and this still remains our strategy to advance this next year as a major rehabilitation, and we've started that financial planning many years ago to acknowledge that, because it's not as if it's a development charge type related rehabilitation or widening, and there are no such fundings available through that mechanism. But we've some of the funding programs that we were unsuccessful with were different funding streams, but also the OCIF top-up. So the most recent OCIF top-up was, I think it was a $28,000 allowance for the municipality, but in previous applications, you're correct, we weren't successful with that. But the formula base, we automatically get that year over year, and it's in the hundreds of thousands, I think, is our don't quote me, I believe it's 900,000, maybe our full allocation for that. But so we do have sufficient funds, or a large portion of funds already dedicated to this rehabilitation.
Okay, so just a supplemental question. So if we actually commence work, is there still an opportunity for funding or granting from provincial work?
Well, it's a function of when that funding program presents itself. Sometimes they have conditions about if you apply, they will consider expenses, from April beyond. So it depends on the funding criteria and the formulas, but it has been our priority funding program that's our application for many funds in recent years. So I think we've done well to plan for this eventuality. And again, this isn't a surprise to anyone at this table. We've already advanced the detailed design, and we have the staging established. We've got we're in place to mobilize and advance that, and we're looking to do it actually next spring, so we're not impeding the kind of the traffic and everything else. And we believe we can have the major rehabilitation completed within 2 to 3 months, and some minor completion following the summer. So we're looking at strategies to avoid that our busy season in the summer. At the same token, we know that there is development activity, and there's going to be a lot of activity along that corridor, and we want to be mindful of that as well, and don't want to be having multiple major capital projects underway at the same time. So our strategy, and those we'll see it again come forward in the spring, over the next few months for budget as a priority as well.
Thank you.
Mr. Wells, would you mind putting the lights on for me, please? I can barely see people at the other end of the table. Thank you. Mayor Smith?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just with respect to the amount of pedestrian bridges we have, and we've heard that some of those bridges have been closed or out of commission for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. It says to me that they're probably not needed. And so I'd like to see a future report come forward early on, maybe either this council or the next council, but very soon, that tells us each and every bridge what the requirement is, rehabilitate versus repair, because I'd like to see the difference in those costs, to Councillor Ego's point earlier. But bridges that haven't been used for 5 years, do we really need to replace them or rehabilitate them, or do we just take them out? And so I'd like to see a report on that.
Okay, and I think that's probably part of your process.
That's part of the strategy, yeah. Mr. Mayor, and certainly we know along McIntyre Creek behind Basswood there's 2, if not 3 bridges that I wouldn't recommend now to replace, because you do have a crossing opposite Sumac, and the majority of the trail network is on the west side of the creek, and you don't necessarily need another bridge structure 500 meters down from the newly improved Sumac bridge for that expense. They can walk another 500 meters to cross and then carry on the west side. So that strategy will be brought forward, and certainly I don't disagree.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Councillor Smith?
Just a couple of things, Madam Chair. Further to the mayor's point, are any of these significant to bike trails, hiking trails, some of these pedestrian bridges?
Well, certainly the one that we've stabilized on Trillium Creek at Christopher Avenue is part of the Carly Patterson Trail. And as I indicated, we plan to advance that contract this fall, utilizing the Pridham Park monies and deferring the Pridham Park Bridge because it technically could be deferred another 5 years. When we say trails, though, and I called it the McIntyre Trail, but I know our GIS calls it the Sunnydale Trails. But the trail network along either side of McIntyre Creek, behind Martin Drive and behind Basswood and Maple Drive, they're not necessarily trails as you would think of 3-meter wide limestone screening trails. They're pathways. So that's another opportunity for us to advance the trail network and improve those trails concurrently with whatever our decision is with the bridge structures. But I wouldn't necessarily say they're an accessible biking trail unless they're on a mountain bike. And right now they can't cross the creek anyway, so they're technically dead-ended pathways. So the other structures I don't believe are along the biking
Right.
route.
And further to that is with the, I think you talked about it earlier, is with the Main Street Bridge development. I believe in the Fork report there were suggestions of a roundabout there. And I just wondered, in your design drawings, would you be considering what's going to be happening with the road network there?
So there hasn't been any design in that regard, Councillor. In terms of the kind of the traffic and the road network along that corridor, as we advance the environmental assessment for Main Street reconstruction, the traffic analysis is undertaken, and that evaluates the traffic volumes, the level of service at the intersections, and will also evaluate signalization versus roundabouts, and all that information will be presented for consideration. At this point, we haven't advanced that. The terms of reference are going to the consultants this week, if not next. And that'll be a year environmental assessment to go through that process. So the bridge design that we have, I know there's been concepts presented through the Downtown Development Master Plan, in which we will require our consultants to evaluate the feasibility of that and the viability. So that hasn't been undertaken in its entirety just yet, but it is planned through the EA. The bridge rehabilitation work is, we've presented those designs, I believe, in the last couple, maybe a couple of years ago, but it's technically the same platform width. I believe it's 3 lanes with bond road and bike lanes, wider sidewalks, and then we're rehabilitating and replacing the barrier walls consistent with what you see on Main Street. And then through the course of the EA, those intersection improvements, certainly to accommodate a roundabout, there's property needs, obviously, that would be identified and acknowledged through the EA as well. So there's been no designs advanced for roundabouts, other than, we've put more emphasis into the Beck Street. We've done some preliminary analysis on that roundabout, but not at any other intersection.
Well, it's just, if we're going to do a lot of work on the bridge, it would be nice if whatever the plan is, it works with it. I'm not saying, oh gee, we should have done whatever when we were redoing the bridge, but it's just to make sure that all the connecting pieces at either end of the bridge work with the bridge.
I don't disagree. In terms of the footprint of the bridge, we're maintaining the footprint, we're maintaining the abutments. There's no proposal to perform any major reconstruction of that or realignment. I know that's the fixed structure, and the design will have to integrate with that fixed structure. So from the design perspective, and this is obviously a function of the class environmental assessment for the Main Street, which would extend Main Street all the way through Moseley to 6th Street. We want to do a comprehensive EA that includes, among other items, the traffic analysis and intersection improvements that are warranted and impacts to side streets. But the roundabouts, so the EA has to happen. You have to clear that EA period. If there's an appeal, that obviously could extend that period. Following that, then the detailed design advances. So, I wouldn't suggest that the detailed design will advance within the next year, because you need to clear the EA first. But all those elements would be evaluated through the EA.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Bray? So just to be clear, if we rehab the bridge, do we have to go through the 1-year environmental assessment to rehab?
No.
No, because that's just maintenance of the existing structure.
Correct.
So the environmental assessment is only if we're changing the bridge significantly.
Bridge capacity, correct. It's currently a 3-lane bridge now. We're not altering the capacity of the bridge. It's going to be maintained as a 3-lane bridge. If we were to reduce it or increase capacity under the Municipal Class Environmental Assessment Act, there's different cost thresholds. If you're going to do improvements or change capacity, in this case to a road, if it's above 2.4 million, we'll say, you have to undertake a Schedule B. If it's above that threshold and there's potential property needs, then that elevates to a Schedule C. So the Class EA document defines when EAs are warranted, and from this standpoint, we're maintaining capacity. And it's not part of the EA per se. The EA is really specific to the 4 lanes down to the 2 lanes, acknowledging the streetscaping needs and the property that's been identified through the urban design guidelines is advancing that.
So do we need the EA? to
Not
move
for the
forward?
bridge.
Not
for the bridge, correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Brian and Kevin. Next is unfinished business. Is there any questions on that item? No other agency reports, which takes us to the consent agenda. It's moved by Councillor Ego, seconded by Councillor Boulanger. Be it resolved that the Public Works section of the Coordinating Committee does hereby receive the September 13th, 2018 consent agenda items 4.4.1 through to 4.4.3, and that all the recommendations contained therein be adopted.
Thank you, Chair by Fulci. Having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Councillor Boulanger?
In favor?
Councillor Bray? In favor? Councillor Ego?
In favor?
Councillor Smith?
In favor.
Mayor Smith?
Pardon me, in favor?
And Chair by Fulci? In favor. Vote is 6 in favor, 0 opposed. Motion carries.
Thank you, and that is the end of this section, so we'll recess for 10 minutes and come back.
we'll call this this section of the coordinated committee back to order. This is the development services section. Deputations, petitions, presentations, and public meetings, we have none. Unfinished business is there before you. Other agency reports, we have none. Consent agenda, nothing has been pulled unless anyone would like something pulled at this point in time. So if not, I have a motion to be moved to seconded actually. So hasn't been circulated yet. So motion moved by Councillor Bray, seconded by Deputy Mayor Biapolchi. Resolved that the Development Services section of Coordinated Committee hereby receives the September 13, 2018 consent agenda items 5.1 through to 5.4.3, and that all the recommendations contained therein be adopted as amended. Oh, what happened?
Nothing was amended, correct? Do we want to amend?
Can we make a
Friendly amendment? So council would agree to that? You might want to restate the question.
Okay, I'm going to restate the question because at the end, the way this has been typed, it says as amended and we have no amendments to the motion. So before we vote, I'll just reread the motion. Resolved that the Development Services section of Coordinated Committee hereby receives the September 13, 2018 consent agenda items 5.1 through to 5.4.3, and that all the recommendations contained therein be adopted.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Councillor Belanger?
In favor?
Deputy Mayor Biapolchi?
In favor?
Councillor Bray?
In favor?
Councillor Ego?
In favor?
Mayor Smith?
In favor?
And Chair Smith.
In favor?
6 in favor, 0 opposed, motion is carried.
Thank you. And there being no further business on the Development Services section, we will adjourn, come back in about 5 minutes once we get our recording secretary here.
And commence the general government section of coordinated committee. Prior to starting, this may be a good time for Andrew McNeil, our Director of Economic Development, to introduce our new Chief Building Official. So I'll leave that for you, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to introduce Danny Rogers, who has joined us a couple weeks ago. Danny comes to us from the town of Innisfil, so essentially we've swapped CBOs. And Danny's already rolling up his sleeves, and thrilled to have Danny with us. So I don't know if you want to ask Danny any questions or. Welcome.
Thank you. Danny, maybe you could just give us like a couple sentences of your background.
Sure.
Through the chair to all committee members, very happy to be here. I come to you with, I first joined the municipal sector in 2005. My experience previous to that was in the private sector, doing large-scale residential development in Toronto. Went to Toronto probably in the mid-90s. Part of that was basically worked anywhere and everywhere I could in Northern Ontario, building houses. So I believe that I bring to this job a lot of practical experience, practical knowledge, and then over the course of the last 13 years working in various municipalities around Ontario, and redefining the approach to development and trying to streamline processes and from the municipality's point of view, combining the efforts of development engineering departments, planning departments, and building departments. So there's more of a one-window approach for not only stakeholders but also our residents. And in my last job, I also oversaw bylaw, and we rolled the bylaw division inside the building division as well, and that made for a lot of synergies in terms of enforcement and sort of redefining the approach to a more user-friendly approach, and that residents didn't feel intimidated to approach the town hall to resolve their issues. So I'm happy to take any questions if you have any. Other than that, I'll let you get on with your meeting.
All right. Any questions? No. So just thank you for that, and welcome to Wasaga Beach, and it should be exciting times ahead. So.
Well, thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.
Okay, so we'll move on to deputation petitions and presentations, and we have one, and we'll call Ms. King to the table, and from Peter McCallum Limited, and she will be in attendance to present to committee the Phase 2 environmental site assessment of the Glenwood Drive municipal parking lot. Welcome.
Thank you.
There's just two maps. These on PDF.
Great.
Actually, no.
I emailed them to you. I think, yeah. I have extra copies though. Or I can send them. Okay.
Thank you.
I'm not going to say anything.
Reference.
Thank you.
Either that or 346. Yeah, so if I may, Mr. Chair, just give a brief background, and I'll let Melissa take it from here. Obviously, we've been in front of general government once before, advancing the environmental site assessment for the municipal Glenwood parking lot. We've undertaken the Phase 1 as well as a Phase 2, and following that was a Phase 2 supplemental where we had to advance additional boreholes and monitoring wells to verify the limits of the contamination at this property as a result from the former gas station that occupied that land. And we do now have the results, and I've asked Melissa to come forward and present the results and next steps. Good?
Okay. So there's two drawings, just bottom left, right corner, 2-4 and 2-5. So drawing 2-4 shows the soil contamination that is on site. and it's indicated in the pink or reddish hatching. I'll talk to the soil contamination first. There's generally 4 areas on site. They're labeled areas 1 through 4. Area 1 is in the area of the former tavern. It's one of the smaller locations on site where there's contamination. Second area is the east part of the property, the northeast corner, which is in the former gas station area. And then there's a larger section kind of in the north central part, again, likely associated with the former gas station. And then we have some shallow contamination in the fill material down in the southeast corner of the property. And if you look, each area has approximate volumes. Area 1, for example, and I think this might be in your report as well, Kevin. Area 1 is about 50 square meters. Area 2 is 60 square meters. So these are fairly small. Area 3 is around 210 square meters, and then Area 4 is the biggest, which is around 610 square meters. So the soil contamination, we have been able to delineate it. If you see, when we draw these, I'm going to call them boxes around the contamination, we basically have to draw them from a clean sampling location to the next clean sampling location. So we can say for certain that this, contamination is limited to this box where we've drawn it. The only case where we cannot do that is if we're close to the property line, we would extend the box to the property line. So you can see area 4, which is the biggest one near Main Street. That one, we have a soil contamination near the property line, so we just assume it extends to the property line. But all other locations, we've been able to have that clean box drawn around the areas of soil contamination. So I'll move on to the groundwater, unless you want to talk about soil first. But
if I may, Laura, do you have access to that email with the plans? It might be easier just to put them on the up on the screen, and then we can just reference this. Sorry, I had it on PDF, but sorry about that. It's my fault. Just so the public can see. Development services was too quick, so we wanted to.
I think that was a record.
Pretty close for development services, that's for sure.
It's easier to follow on the maps now.
Oh, no.
What's the other device? Is that it?
If you just go to computer. The thumb drive didn't show.
It's not. Is it up on the?
Okay. Well, my apologies. We can keep speaking about it, but unless we get IT, I don't know.
Do you want me to continue?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll continue then. So drawing 2-5 is the groundwater contamination that we have confirmed on site. As you can see, it's mostly limited to the north portion of the property, which is where the gas station used to be. Groundwater flow direction is towards the west-southwest, so we'll be moving from the east side of the property towards the west side of the property. Again, what we try and do is draw a box around clean locations, so that's why you can see in the west area you have the little bit of a jog, because those are all clean wells. We have recommended some additional work just to better fine-tune the extent of the groundwater contamination. As you can see in the middle part, we don't have any monitoring wells, so we would just want to confirm the limits of it, and then therefore we can come up with some good volumes in terms of soil contamination as well as groundwater contamination. One thing to note with respect to the soil contamination, the concentrations are fairly low, actually. So it's not from our perspective, not a significant issue in terms of being able to remediate it or risk assess it, whatever the approach is going to be. Groundwater is similarly manageable in terms of the levels of the contamination that we're seeing, with the highest being in the former gas station area, which is common and is typically expected. So I don't know what other details we want to get into, or questions and things like that.
Yeah, no, I think just to summarize, obviously there has been an approximate volume of contaminated soil identified. In terms of refinement of those limits, primarily to the groundwater table monitoring, or the groundwater condition monitoring, we've identified an estimated consulting budget to advance that. In terms of a strategy to advance next steps, we will be looking to Peter McCallum to provide that those details. Now, there's different options available, and maybe Melissa can speak to this about risk assessments versus removals, and there's different strategies in terms of how we deal with this. Certainly my mind goes, without fully understanding the process or these environmental issues, is full removal. But there is that potential to undertake a risk assessment and leave it in place and monitor. So maybe if you wouldn't mind just speaking about the differences there. And again, this will be presented further in terms of next steps.
Sure. So I'll back up just a little bit in terms of the driver for this assessment. Basically, we're changing the land use to something that's more sensitive. So the last known use was considered an industrial commercial use. We want to change it to a residential parkland or community type use. So that triggers a record of site condition, or RSC, is what we call short form. So the way to get a record of site condition is you have to, and it's a document filed with the Ministry of the Environment. The way to go about obtaining that RSC, which is the proof that you've done the work required for the intended land use, is you can either do remediation, which would be either you're, as Kevin mentioned, you're digging the soil out, pumping the water, treating it, and then you're removing all the contamination, and then we take confirmatory samples to make sure we've removed it all. Or the second option would be what we call a risk assessment, which is also a Ministry of the Environment procedure, where you do no longer rely on the ministry's generic criteria, which is what we're using today. You would create your own site-specific standards, which are protective of human health and the environment. So the big difference being usually time and cost, of course. A risk assessment takes a little bit longer, or can take a bit longer, because the ministry is involved and the ministry reviews the document, it gets peer reviewed, and then they need to sign off on it. The cost, however, is usually less for risk assessment. So a remediation is quicker, more definitive, but is more expensive. A risk assessment, equally viable option, a fraction of the cost, but just takes a little bit more time. So depending on the development plan and the timing involved, there's two options for how you would obtain the record of site condition. Before we can go to the next step of figuring, assessing what the remedial action plan would be, whether it's going to be remediation or risk assessment, it's like I said, we just want to fine-tune some of the volumes that we're dealing with. Another option for remediation would be to treat it in situ. So that's where you inject things into the ground to take care of the soil contamination and the groundwater contamination. So those are three options available, depending on details of what the development's going to be. Some criteria or factors that may play into it. I'm not sure how much soil is going to be excavated as part of the development. So if the soil's coming out anyway, you may want to choose to just get rid of it. Maybe only risk assess the water, the groundwater contamination, things like that. So there's lots of options for how you would obtain the record of site condition. I don't know if that helped or confused the issue.
So basically, we're going to be looking at the best option. We'll be consulting. Obviously, we have a partner with that property, and we'll be consulting with economic development as well in terms of different strategies as that advances through development. Regardless, the next report will come forward in terms of recommended strategy, but obviously we've identified the general limits, and now we have a volume and a quantity to further analyze what is the best approach. Is it full removal? We do have some preliminary numbers in terms of removal costs that could be upwards of $450,000. That does not, there's some exemptions, and I've noted that in my report, but we're now refining where we are in terms of the volume and what is the best approach to address that. So there will be a subsequent report come forward, but this is to provide the latest update to committee.
Okay, I have a question. If,
You're the chair.
I'll probably go first, but
He's the chair.
yeah, at a previous meeting they had talked about a barrier or a bladder that is sometimes used, and like clearly, if the plans go forward for that area, there's going to be some level of excavation. It may not be the depth of removal and all the contamination, but that wasn't brought up as one of the options this time, but it had been discussed at a previous meeting. So
I can, sure. So in a case like that, what they may be speaking of is a risk management measure. So you're going to remove whatever soil is required for the construction or excavation, whatever is required for the development. You'll leave whatever contamination is not required to be dug out as part of the development, but you'll put some sort of geotextile or barrier to separate it, and that's a risk management measure. And that's something you often find in a risk assessment. So definitely something that could be considered, and that is mostly to prevent about indoor air quality, migration of vapors and things like that into any proposed buildings that might go on site. But it's relatively inexpensive to do, and then gives you that break between what is left and then new construction, new soil. So it's definitely, but that would be part of the risk assessment process.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Bray?
Yeah, through you. So on the map we obviously own this piece of land, but abutting that piece of land is Main Street, which the municipality also owns. You taken the boundary out to the road, well, what are the odds that it has leached out under the road too? And if construction involves changing the sidewalk, changing the roadscape, that we're going to end up with this same process next door.
So out on Main Street, so I'm looking at drawing 2-4, which is the one that's on the screen. You can see really hard. There, this little area here, that's been delineated, so we know there's no soil contamination that goes that way.
Right.
Same with over here, on this east side. We've got a box around, there's nothing that goes that way. Along Main Street here, you're correct, we do have a borehole that's close to the property line that has some low-level contamination. The guideline is 98, and we have 282. Right. So that's, from our perspective, is fairly minor. As part of some additional work, we would want to put a couple boreholes right at as close to the property line as possible to find out if it indeed crosses over. If the municipality wishes, we could also go on municipal property, and that just informs any future work off-site. So whether or not you're going to be dealing with contaminated soil and things like that. If I don't, numbers here. Go to 2-5, the next drawing. So. So the groundwater is a little different. So we have clean monitoring wells here. All the monitoring wells that are closest to the north property line have contamination in them. So there is a possibility that there is some off-site migration onto Main Street, but we wouldn't know those levels unless we're actually able to drill in the right of way.
So then further through you to Kevin, because we own that property next door, does it not make sense to expand this project now rather than?
I guess the question again for Melissa is, you could, or you could address this parcel of land and risk assess whether that is warranted as we advance, because the reconstruction of Main Street, we have an urban design, the timing of which we still need to establish. So if this is the priority and we want to advance Glenwood as phase 1, then you could address this property and risk assess and risk manage beyond the parcel, at which point when we do come through to complete the reconstruction, the streetscaping, it could be addressed through that at a separate stage.
What could happen is if this parcel developed first is along the property line, you would put a similar barrier, as Mr. Chair was speaking of, that you put on the bottom. This time you put it on the sides. So where the property and Main Street abut, you put a barrier there to prevent basically what you've cleaned up on your development parcel versus Main Street, and then you deal with Main Street as time permits when it actually comes up. But it's not. This is a very common problem. Is you have minor migration onto your adjacent municipal property, but typically, from our experience, it's dealt with during that actual road reconstruction or road works that are being done, and then we just make provision during remediation of the actual site or however it's going to be handled, to put some sort of barrier if the timing of Main Street works is too far out, things like that.
Kind of further, because it's still not clear. So the artist concept that we've seen for this plot of land includes the streetscape. So does it not make sense as a municipality to be doing both rather than doing the environmental assessment on the piece of land that we're maybe selling, maybe not, I'm not sure, knowing that if that town square goes forward, part of that includes the roundabout, the sidewalks, the bike lanes,
So the advancement of the streetscaping and the timing of that has yet to be confirmed. I know there's concepts and renderings of that being done concurrently. However, as committee is aware, the urban design guidelines that have been defined for the new downtown, the road allowance width is considerably more than what we have. and there was discussions of staging. You know, we could advance what we can within our road allowance limit and then proceed with the ultimate once we acquire the property. There's certainly more discussions to be held about, you know, what the frontage or what Main Street is going to look like as part of the Civic Square development. We haven't had those level of discussions other than the conceptual and the artist rendering. Now, as part of the redevelopment and the construction of the Civic Square, certainly if we are going to advance some of the streetscaping in conjunction with that, we just want to make sure that we're doing it once. So there's obviously utilities, and we need to be mindful of how we are advancing that. And a lot of that is evaluated through the EA that we are doing, because the EA is looking at, okay, this is the defined streetscape. This is the intensity, the densification that is being proposed. Sure, we're looking at traffic, but we're also looking at natural hazard, we're looking at environmental features, we're looking at utilities, we're looking at a number of different elements as part of that comprehensive EA to satisfy the Environmental Assessment Act. So to say that we're doing the streetscaping and the intersection as part of Civic Square, that hasn't been defined at this point, in my opinion. I know the EA has to be completed before we advance. You can't piecemeal, you should not piecemeal, and the Act discourages piecemealing of improvements when your EA is, but not to say you can't do anything internal to the property. You can certainly advance the internal. It's how we address the advancement of the streetscape. Does that help at all?
I think we're a lot further out than pictures that have maybe been presented to the public indicate. I think they've been shown pictures of a development proposal that includes the main street in front of this piece of property. We obviously have this obligation to clean up this property. So my question is, would we clean up beside it because it's part of the, you know, the pictures that they've shown us? Or we treat it as a separate issue because we haven't done our due diligence yet to move it forward?
We'd evaluate that. I can't say whether we would or not at this time. If there's an opportunity to do it more feasibly now and we can accommodate, we own that property, so that dedication or that road allowance widening could potentially happen concurrent with this, and we could advance the frontage, but you want to make sure you have continuity through that corridor as well, so you need to look at the details, and we're not at that detail stage, guys.
Okay, thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, and I don't want to belabor the point. There's also the 140 Main Street that's used as a civic building of the town. You know, it's the same situation that Councillor Gray is speaking to. But I hope that when you're obviously going to be bringing more information back, I hope that we have within the costs and things like that, you use the term partner on this property. I don't know if I would use the same term, but regardless, there is somebody else involved with this property, so will they be paying for a piece of or part of this? And I don't expect an answer now, but I think that when this moves forward, I think that's something that we need to have an answer on as well.
Through you, Mr. That absolutely, and those discussions have been preliminary with the developer, and certainly there's more details to share, and that information will come forward. Obviously, they're experienced in this type of work, so it would be in our interest if they're able to accommodate.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, if there's no further questions, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, unfinished business, one item, any comments? Oh, yes, sorry. Yes, So moved by Councillor Eagle and seconded by Councillor Smith. Resolved that General Government Section of Coordinating Committee received the presentation from Ms. King of Peter McCallum Limited pertaining to the Phase 2 environmental site assessment of the Glenwood Drive municipal parking lot for information.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Councillor Gray?
In favor?
Deputy Mayor Byfolchi?
In favor?
Councillor Ego?
In favor.
Councillor Smith?
In favor.
Mayor Smith?
In favor?
Chair Boulanger?
In favor?
Vote is 6 in favor, 0 opposed, motion carries.
Okay, so unfinished business, any comments? Other agency reports, we have none. Consent agenda, we have no pulled items. So moved by Councillor Eagle and seconded by Mayor Smith. Resolved that General Government Section of Coordinating Committee hereby receives the September 13th, 2018 consent agenda items 6.4.1 through 6.4.3 and that the recommendations contained therein be adopted.
I'll call for the vote. Councillor Bright?
In favor?
Deputy Mayor Byfolchi?
In favor?
Councillor Ego?
In favor.
Councillor Smith?
In favor.
Mayor Smith?
In favor?
Chair Boulanger?
In favor?
6 in favor, 0 opposed, motion carries.
Is there a motion for closed session or we just?
Oh, yes, sorry.
Sorry? This one first. Moved by Councillor Bray and seconded by Mayor Smith. Resolved that pursuant to Section 239B CE of the Municipal Act 2001 as amended, the next portion of Coordinated Committee meeting on September 13th, 2018 be closed to the public to discuss a proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land by the municipality, personal matters about identifiable individuals, and litigation or potential litigation.
I'll call for the vote. Councillor Bright?
In favor?
Deputy Mayor Byfolchi?
In favor?
Councillor Ego?
In favor.
Councillor Smith?
In favor.
Mayor Smith?
In favor?
Chair Boulanger?
In favor?
Vote is 6 in favor, 0 opposed, motion carries.
Okay, we'll give a couple moments for the moving back into open session and moved by Councillor Eagle, seconded by Mayor Smith. Resolved that General Government Section of Coordinating Committee does hereby confirm the advice given to the Director of Finance and Treasurer in closed session pertaining to personal matters about identifiable individuals, litigation or potential litigation, as it deals with an assessment appeal. And moved by Councillor Eagle and seconded by Mayor Smith. Resolved that General Government Section of Coordinating Committee does hereby confirm the advice given to the CAO in closed session pertaining to a proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land on River Road West by the municipality. Sorry, we'll do the first one first. We're calling for the vote.
Having read the question, we'll call for the vote. Councillor Bray? In favor. Deputy Mayor Bartolci? In favor. Councillor Ego?
In favor.
Councillor Smith?
In favor.
Mayor Smith?
In favor?
Chair Belanger?
In favor?
Vote is 6 in favor, 0 opposed.
The second motion related to the land.
Motion relating to the Director of Finance in closed session pertaining to personal matters about identifiable individuals and litigation and potential litigation as it deals with the assessment appeal. I'll call for the vote. Councillor Bright? In favor. Deputy Mayor Bartolci? In favor. Councillor Ego?
In favor.
Councillor Smith?
In favor.
Mayor Smith?
In favor?
Chair Belanger?
In favor.
Vote is 6 in favor, 0 opposed. Motion carries.
Any other matters? I believe we have none, and we have a date for the next meeting. And that's it. October 11th is next meeting, 8:30 a.m. here, and the meeting is now adjourned.